Hello, everyone. Satya Nadal said last year since the SQL Server, the next biggest thing would be Fabric. Now, what happens if SQL Server now enters Fabric? Well, that's what happened. So we're trying to figure out the magnanimity of it. But now Microsoft just announced we are going to have Azure SQL and essentially the SQL Server technology built into Fabric in the same fashion that we're used to. Just with a click, we're going to get a Azure SQL database. And that is literally thought-provoking. And even for me, to be honest, I'm trying to understand what it means. But Nicola, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great addition because basically the Fabric was sold as an end-to-end analytic solution, and it contained all the parts except how to store operational data. Because yeah, let's be honest, for storing some metadata or like transactional data in a warehouse or lakehouse, this was not the best possible choice. So I'm happy to see this addition. Yeah.
So you're saying now that with Fabric databases, we are going to start having transactional loads, essentially not just analytical, but operational loads in Fabric now.
That's true. And on top of that, these operational data will be also automatically mirrored into your OneLake. So essentially, you will get, again, delta tables mirrored in the background. That happens automatically. And then because you have those delta tables exposed from this SQL database in Fabric, you can use them for in a combination with all the other Fabric engines, like OLTP for Power BI, or I don't know, you can write cross-database queries combining data from that database and lake houses, warehouses, mirror databases, so whatever comes to your mind or whatever you need.
Oh, all right. So now that we have the transactional data in the same place, we do not have to do the ETL ourselves. Microsoft is essentially mirroring the database, which is right now what we can do from a mirror database perspective from an external Azure SQL. Microsoft's doing that by default and giving us the mirrored database in a 𝗷𝘂𝗀𝗴𝗏 format, meaning we are essentially getting close to near real-time replicated data without doing any CDC work ourselves.
That's correct. That's correct. So it's a pure software as a service. So you just need to define database name and you're good to go. No DTUs, nothing.
I'm going to come back to the question you meant by software as a service. Govind, what do you think?
I, for one, I am excited about this entire SQL DB present in Fabric. We know how tightly integrated the data engineering tools are in Fabric, right? Now with SQL DB being an additional option available, I'm just interested in seeing how this SQL DB will play with the other tools that we already have. And as Nicola mentioned, the SQL Analytics endpoint and the cross-querying with lakehouse and warehouse, it is definitely a very good feature, I would say. And this processing of data directly from the transaction system, this one is called as hybrid transaction analytical processing. It was part of Cosmos, and I think they had implemented this feature right now in Fabric. And as Nicola had mentioned, this software as a service is going to be exciting because we are going to run SQL DB entirely on Fabric capacity itself.
So you're saying people are going to can now move from Microsoft Access to Fabric databases?
Yes,
from Excel to Fabric database.
Yeah, that was about to say.
But no, I think the part, this is big. The reason becomes is that a lot of the reason the organizations, surprisingly how often I walk into at conferences, that the businesses still use Access. And obviously Excel, they try to, but Excel obviously has the limit of the size. But people still end up using these other databases that are neither governed nor secure, neither have backup or any of that stuff. Now, with one click, I mean, this is at the same time dream come true for business users and dream come true for IT's nightmare, right? So essentially, like, no more, they don't have to worry about the database not being protected, secure, disappearing with someone's laptop or not.
Not necessarily. So, I mean, from security perspective, you still need to care, of course, but you just need to handle security and governance part in a different way, because now this item becomes part of your Fabric workspace. So the similarly how you control the access and permissions and security for other Fabric items, you will do the in a similar way for a SQL database. So
I agree with you. I think
yeah.
where I was coming from is essentially like a Microsoft Access database on a shared drive. The security of that one versus the security of one that's in Fabric.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So let's kind of talk about the SaaS, right? So this is the first time we have this more as a SaaS option, right? So currently the option that we have in the cloud, right? So SQL Server on-prem is something different, but now we have different flavors of SQL in Azure, right? So we can install SQL Server in a VM. I think that's infrastructure as a service, right? And then both the managed SQL Server and the Azure SQL DB, both are, I think, considered as a platform as a service, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Meaning we got to go figure out the security, we got to do all the stuff ourselves to do the configurations.
Yeah,
that's
correct.
So now with Fabric, this is the first time we have a database that's SaaS.
Operational database that is SaaS, yeah.
This is a big step in Azure SQL DB. I mean, big step after Azure SQL DB.
I think there's like two parts of it that I think I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around it. Is I think when Microsoft added Fabric to the Power BI tenant, it reached a massive amount of users, right? I think the second user base, I mean, there's obviously the Excel user base that's like comparing to the sun, so that one's out of the picture. But I think touching the SQL Server touches a humongous population of technology users that have been using SQL Server this entire time. And now they are allowed to work in an same environment as the analytics team. And again, like how we see in Fabric, the SQL, Python, or Power Query users, all of them are first-class citizen. Seems like they are trying to give the same thing to the database community now.
Yeah, from a pure developer perspective, so you still need to know SQL. So in this case, I'm not sure if Visual Query is supported now. Will probably be, and Copilot and all this stuff that make life easier or harder, depending how you look at it.
I wasn't really coming from that. What I was thinking, Nicola, is before like a full SQL programmer, and the application people, they're like, well, Fabric is not for me. This is for the analytics folks, right? But now they also have their own artifact that the other people can use, obviously, but they have like essentially, if you're the SQL developer and whatnot, you have your Azure SQL.
Yes, yep, absolutely. I mean, this totally fits the mantra of Fabric, like it is unified experience for all data professionals. So that totally makes sense what you said. Yeah, I agree.
Govind?
Yes, when he mentioned about this visual query, I was thinking about the Power BI data mart, and I was thinking about how, this one would be like a successor for that.
That's a really good point. I think when we had and I think probably makes sense. We have not seen any announcement come out for Power BI Data Mart in over 2-3 years now. So I'm guessing that technology was also based on Azure SQL, but it was only from a transaction processing perspective. Sorry, I take it back. It's what was more from an analytic perspective to use the Azure SQL DB as an analytical load, versus now seems like the Fabric database takes a leap forward by giving you transaction and analytical at the same time.
Yeah, I was just mentioning about this mirroring part. Now that SQL DB is much closer to the other analytical tools in Fabric, maybe compared to mirroring, this one would be much faster. and we are yet to see like how much latency we are going to have when we bring the data from SQL DB into Fabric. That is one thing that I am looking forward to test.
Perfect. So on that note, I think there's obviously it opens a lot of questions for us, right? So, and I know we are excited about it, but at the same time, there are a lot of questions. For example, simple like, why should I pick Azure SQL DB versus Fabric SQL DB, right? Which one should we use, right? I know it's SAS versus PaaS, but I'm guessing there are limitations right now in Fabric database that would make us go one way or versus the other, because we can technically use Azure SQL DB with mirroring to get similar, but not the exact same thing, because we walked into a prototyping issue that we did is essentially when we do disaster recovery switchover, the mirroring breaks. Versus, I'm guessing Fabric database mirroring will not break because it's doing the native disaster recovery or something like that, failover or something like that. Questions, right? What other questions, Nicola, are you trying to figure out?
So for me, yeah, few questions. You brought one. This point is completely valid. Like, should I use Azure SQL DB, regular one, and then do the mirroring or do the ETL or whatever, or should I use SQL DB in Fabric? So again, it's a hard question. It's a tough question. I like to compare this. Like, do you want to sit in the back seat of the self-driven car, or do you want to drive the car yourself? So it depends. Again, it boils down to SaaS versus PaaS, but it also boils down. I mean, it's not a fair comparison because Azure SQL DB is a mature product. It's here for, I don't know, 10 years or so. Fabric, the SQL DB in Fabric was just introduced. It's in preview. Still a lot of limitations. And features that are not yet available. So I think the fair comparison, the fair question would be in a few months, or let's say a year, or whenever Fabric SQL DB goes to GA. That's one thing I would say. From pure mirroring perspective, I had some talks, and it was explained to me that mirroring for Azure SQL DB and mirroring for SQL DB in Fabric use exactly the same technology in the background. So just from where you are bringing your data. Is it your Azure SQL DB as platform as a service solution versus this new one that exists in Fabric? But technology-wise, it's the same. Now, as you mentioned, also mirroring for Azure SQL DB was in preview up until today. It was also GA as of today. So let's see all of these limitations that you mentioned. Yeah, if they are resolved now or not, I'm not sure. That's one thing. And I also want to go back to the point with data marts, because that would be another question. What happens now with data marts, right? Because yeah, we have fully managed automatic Azure SQL database in the background. So the same thing as with data marts. And I would say because data marts are more than 2 years in public preview, I'm afraid they will never go GA, especially now with the SQL DB in Fabric. I really don't see why would someone use data marts and not SQL DB for Fabric. I would be curious to understand the reasoning and use case. Yeah,
I don't think anybody would. I think the part for people to figure out essentially is premium per user licensing. Because if you're in Fabric, you would just use Fabric databases, right? Funny enough, both are in preview, Fabric database and Power BI Data Mart. However, we can see which one's going to go GA versus the other one comparatively. So I think it doesn't make sense to use Power BI Data Mart at all. From that perspective. So if people are using for analytics load, for smaller loads, they want more SQL compliance. I think this has been one of your pet peeve, right, Nicola? When we're using Fabric Warehouse, it does not enforce keys and all the other SQL things that we want from that perspective. So this is amazing for us to get that now. For some of, we are building table edit. Essentially, we're using a product. to manage master data on top of Fabric natively. And as we're doing that, the warehouse will gladly accept duplicate keys. That has been a challenge for us. So for us to get that portion baked into the Azure SQL, I think, sorry, Fabric database is amazing, right? So I think pretty excited about that. But I think going back to the data mart question is, in premium per user, if you're using Power BI Data Mart, you do not have a secondary option. I think that's essentially the key part for people that are trying to figure out if they're using Power BI Data Mart in premium per user. That is the one open question. And I'm guessing it's going to be deprecated and eventually migrated. That's to be seen.
Yeah, to be seen. I mean, there are no official confirmations or unofficial confirmations, but yeah, I really don't see any use case now with basically you have the same thing plus many more features available out of the box. So
it
looks like a no-brainer. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Govind, go ahead again.
No, Data Mart is the longest product to be in public preview, I guess. I think it has been around for like 2 years.
Yes, and there were no any announcements, any development in last year, at least a year. So I guess also
longer than that.
This is. I said at least a year, but I would say that also tells you something.
But no, I think it made sense. I think from the perspective of Power BI Data Mart, I think it was a very, very promising offering, and that we were kind of missing. Now it kind of makes sense why redoing it. Sometimes rebuilding makes better sense than trying to fix something. I think them going the Fabric database route, they don't really have to add some transactional processing and the full SQL capabilities to a half product versus they took this core product and building on top of it. So I think this will be pretty exciting. I think I would love to see how the latency and the mirrorings are, and for high availability and concurrency type situation, what is the thing? And then usual for app development perspective, for high-end app development, what they would like usually is the failovers, DRs, and whatnot. Those are to be seen. Again, that is not my field, right?
Yeah, we'll see. There are a lot of open questions still. So I don't know, for example, what happens with backups? Yeah, if someone deletes the database. Yeah.
Yes, that is pretty easy.
Yes.
Easy.
That's why I mean previously it was much harder, let's say, to drop the database, to delete the database or whatever. Now it's much easier. So what happens if something like this, occurs? So do I have a backup? Can I just restore my database? I don't know. Those are some things. I mean, we just learned about Fabric SQL DB this afternoon. So a lot of things still to be investigated and understood. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right. That makes sense.
Backup and recovery. This backup and recovery, we have that option in Fabric SQL DB, right? We just need to explore further and see like what are all the limitations we have on that side. And it basically boils down to, whether you want more control over what you're doing in terms of the SQL database, or if you just want it to have less headache and you just want to interact with SQL in a very easy manner.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Govind. One thing I was thinking, Nicola, it's not just for Fabric databases. I think it'll be kind of good to have some kind of protection around certain definition objects that cannot be deleted without essentially doing multiple things, right? So if we mark something as critical, to delete that, you have to go through like 5 steps before you could do it, right? It should have 5 steps to make something critical. But so essentially a workspace or an item is marked critical, you would have to go through like 5 steps. Like, do you want to delete it? Are you sure you really want to delete it? Can you enter the name of this over here? Do you get someone else to validate? Right?
I mean, you have the option with SQL permissions, you can control who can do what. but still,
But a
yeah, but
workspace
still.
admin can just go and delete it, and it will just delete the entire thing, right? So I think, anyways, that's probably a in general feature request from Fabric artifact perspective, because people can do that with the warehouse and lake houses. We would be in the same challenging situation. I think my thing is, I think I have always said Fabric is a unified analytics platform, but now essentially it's also starting to increase and enter the world of transactional processing, essentially unifying the data journey much better from a SaaS perspective. So I'm pretty cautiously optimistic about it.
Yeah, it needs time to explore few more important features like this backup, disaster recovery. How are we going to provide permissions to users? And given that it is all going to be in workspace, I'm just curious how Power BI permissions will have an effect on the SQL DB, all the stuff that we normally have explored in the existing items. We just need to do exploration on the new SQL DB in Fabric.
Yeah, to me, I mean, I like options. I like having options. So yeah, I'm happy to be able to use it. Will I use it, or will we use it? Time will tell. But I'm happy to have the option at least. So and as Govin mentioned, option to do something without too much of a hassle. That sounds good enough for me for the beginning.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. So I think for at least for the time being, one of my biggest highlights from Ignite's updates are the Fabric database. Go try this out. If you have more questions, we'll find out when we have answers. But for the time being, I'll put a link to the blog Nicola wrote in the post. You can go read more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.